John's going to come up. John was in the Hungary trip. Just got back, what, 2 weeks ago? A week ago, same thing. And I asked, and by the way, Colleen Cantors is back. Raise your hand, Colleen. Whoop, whoop. So Colleen is back from Romania. And so we're glad to have her. You'll be hearing from her too. She doesn't know it, but you will be. And also Megan Messa, she was going to be here today too, but she's hanging out with family. She goes back to school. She's going to come back, I think, on Labor Day weekend and share as well. But I think it's encouraging for us to sort of hear what our students were doing and just be encouraged that we were a part of that. Even some of our elders, I think, we're talking about that at our elder meeting, that we got to be a part of that as a church, even though we didn't even leave. But through our prayer and financial giving, we got to be a part of the mission they were doing. So I think that's an amazing win for all of us. But I'm gonna give this to John. He's gonna share a little bit about Josiah Ventures, the organization they went with, and also just about what God did and what God did in his own life. So
sounds good. Hey guys, it's good to be back. Like Wade said, I spent this last summer in the country of Hungary, doing an internship with the missions organization Josiah Venture. And so I actually did that internship with Megan Messa and Abigail Drebeck over at the Wesleyan Church, and then Clint Cantors was over in Romania with the same organization. And then the short-term team that spoke here a couple weeks ago, they were actually at one of our camps. So that was cool to work with people from Hayward as well as people in Hungary. So today I'm just going to tell you, I'm actually just going to tell you a little bit about Hungary and what the summer looked like, and then how God moved in that, and then finally how I grew as a person. And so jumping into what happened this summer, just a little bit about Hungary. Hungary is Eastern Europe. It was one of the communists in the Soviet bloc during the communist era. And so it's a pretty dark place. I mean, spiritually, you don't really hear about mission fields as being Eastern Europe. You hear about Africa, you hear about South America, you hear about Asia, but Europe is kind of that lost missions fields. And so Josiah Venture, the organization I partnered with, their vision is to see a movement of God among the youth of Central and Eastern Europe. And so that's kind of the vision going into the summer that we were working towards. And so how that happens is that Josiah Venture works through various camps. They work through sports camps, English camps, and music camps. This summer, I got to be a part of the English camp ministry in Hungary. Hungary is a relatively new country in Josiah Venture. They started, I think, just a little bit under 10 years ago. And so now they've got, I think, about 5 or 6 permanent staff there, connecting with churches. And so the mission of Josiah Venture is to partner with local churches. They don't go in and plant a whole lot of churches. They go in and find churches that are already in existence and then help them and encourage them and help to grow them and help them reach their communities. So what the summer looked like for me then was I got to Hungary at the end of May, and I connected with students at schools. We did school visits, telling them about camp. We did church retreats with the churches that we were partnering with, and then we helped put on 3 different English camps throughout the summer. And then after that, for 2 weeks, we followed up with these students. So moving into how God moved during these camps, it was honestly a really incredible thing to see. At our first camp, we had about 16 students, but what was amazing about this camp was that our camp director was 19 years old. And so the whole camp was run by the youth leaders of the youth group of the church we were partnering with. So 5 youth leaders were running this English camp. They were finding the venue, they were organizing food, planning activities, and so it made my job really simple. So I just led activities, I taught an English class, and just to see God use young leaders, a 19-year-old, to lead a camp, that was absolutely incredible. The next camp that we did, where the Hayward team was a part of, this is actually a really cool camp because I've been to this camp twice before during short-term missions trips, and just to see the change over the past 3 years. When I went 3 years ago, I met a kid named Paul. And so Paul actually came to Hayward a couple years ago to visit my family and I in the community. And I met Paul, and he was in like 8th grade. He'd grown up in a Christian family, but he was like a super young believer. Then I came back the next summer, and what I saw was he was actually starting to lead in his youth group. The youth group was growing. It was at about 10 kids that next summer, and he brought a friend named Sabi. And then fast forward to today, their most of their entire class at school is going to youth group of about 30 kids, and that's because of um, Paul was taught by his youth pastor. Then he invited his friend Sabi, and then together invited most of their class. And then the cool thing that happened at that camp, how we saw God move, was the youth group at the beginning of that camp was majority non-believer. It was a lot of atheist kids coming just because they'd been invited, or they just wanted to hear more about who this God person was, who Jesus was. And so, but after that camp, it actually switched from majority non-believer to majority believer. And so my parents were there, my family was there, and just the stories they have about seeing like 10 students, 9 or 10 students come to Christ is absolutely incredible. Moving forward to our third camp, that third camp was partnering with the church in a city of about 65,000 people. In that city, there was no youth ministry whatsoever at any church. And so the goal of this camp was to have the camp, but then also to hopefully launch a youth group at the church. And so camp saw several people come to Christ, but then afterwards, um, it kind of clicked with the church leaders that, hey, this is something we need to invest in. We need to launch a youth group. And so they're actually right now in the works of launching a youth group for those students. And so that's been really neat to see that happen. And then throughout these camps, just seeing students like Paul and Sabi, who I was telling about earlier, they're both 18, 17 and 18, and they're leading their youth group. They're inviting their students to youth group. They're reaching into their communities. There's a couple other students, one down at the last camp we did, who he's a new believer, maybe a year old, but he has a desire to share about God with his friends and at his school. And it's just very neat to see God work in these young leaders. I mean, my age, younger than me, 16, 17. It's just tremendous. So that's essentially in a nutshell how I saw God working throughout the summer at the various camps and with the youth. And then finally, I just want to tell you about how I grew during the summer. Um, the summer was challenging for me in several ways. I had opportunities to learn, um, to exercise leadership throughout the summer at camps, leading students, um, boosting my confidence in leading, and just on down the line. However, there are a couple things that God taught me specifically. And so, getting to Hungary, I was kind of forced to step in into the role of a disciple maker. That is, someone who's sharing God's story with people, someone who's mentoring students, and someone who's just being honest with the students, being kind of like, yeah, like a mentor or a leader figure. So I was kind of forced to step into this summer at the camps, at the youth groups, and that was something I've done before, but something I would say I've stepped away from, say the past year at school. And so stepping back into that, I realized that, let's see, I realized that the role of a disciple maker is not just something for the church or not just something for the pastor, but it's something that Jesus calls all of us to be. During his Great Commission, he tells us to go out into the world and make disciples, make people who follow Jesus, and also to make disciples who make disciples. And so I was put in the role of a disciple maker, having to disciple young leaders, having to share about God and Jesus. And so I encourage all of you here that you guys, you who believe in Jesus and believe that he died for your sins, you guys are disciples of Jesus. And so as you go out in your lives, in your careers, wherever that may be. You guys are stepping into the roles of disciple makers as well. So that's all I have to say about that. If you have any questions, feel free to find me afterwards, and I'd be happy to tell you about just like stories or anything else you want to know.
Man, it's really encouraging to see our students and see this generation taking chances. And you know, I've never been across the ocean, so I've never done that. And some of these guys have done things in their lifetime that I may never get to do, or maybe never have the opportunity to do. But it's really fascinating how God is shaping and molding the generation coming, and it's already here, right, into just some real warriors and some kingdom builders. And I don't know about you, but we need that, right? We need that. If we're not continuing looking at the generation that's coming up and empowering them and also equipping them, but also giving them opportunity to lead, because that's one thing I think John is when he's talking about these youth leaders that are leading this camp being 19, somebody had to give them the opportunity to do that, right? Somebody had to say, you know what, you can do this, you should do this, right? And so I always want to have that conversation in our church. It can't solely be this thing where you're not old enough, right? Or you're not smart enough. I think you guys understand this conversation because you're all looking at me like, yeah, we get it. But I think it's important that we always keep the tension in our tribe that, man, who are we looking to? Who are we raising up to take the gospel to the next level, a level that maybe we can't take it? So thank you so much, John. Appreciate that. Colin, good to see you. I will be texting you later. And if you are available next week, it would be awesome to hear what happened in Romania. No pressure, but I said that to everybody, so now you have to deal with that. So go to Genesis. Genesis 22 is where we're at. Last week we talked about four things that we observed when Abraham's faith was tested. Real quick to clarify, God does not tempt you, but he will test you, right? We talked about temptation is of the devil, man. It's of the enemy. It's of Satan. Tempting is there to disarm you and to make you fall. Temptation is that. God is not a tempter. James reminds us that. He's not a tempter, but he will test you. See, testing strengthens us. It reproves us. It makes us stronger. It gives us a good insight on the blind spots in our life so that we can self-correct, so that we can be reproved and rebuked and corrected. And that's a good thing. But God is not a tempter. And I think we have to really make sure that we understand that when we talk to people and they may say that God's really tempting me to, no. God's not tempting you to do that. James said that we're tempted when we're led astray by our own fleshly desires. That's when we give it in temptation. Temptation is always there to break us down. Testing is always there to make us stronger. One of the things we said, the first thing we said out of four observations about Abraham's faith being tested was that he willfully obeyed. Now to rehearse Genesis 22, God goes to Abraham and he tests his faith. He's testing him. And he tests him with the most valuable thing in his life, which is Isaac, right? This miracle child, Isaac. If you remember the story, Abraham and Sarah are super old, and they don't have a baby, whatever. God comes and prophetically proclaims that they're going to have a child. She laughs. He sort of snickers at the idea, and God's like, hey, I'll be back this time next year and see who's laughing then. And Isaac came, and Isaac means laughter, and so that's sort of the story. We pick up in Genesis 22 in verse 3, and it says, so Abraham, let's do verse 1 through 8. Let's just rehearse this real quick. It says, after these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here am I. He said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on the mountains, on the mountain that I'll show you. In other words, take your son that I gave you and go sacrifice him. There's nowhere in Abraham's mentality that he would have thought anything different than his son was going to die. See, altars are not a place where things live. Altars are a place where things die. And so we talked about one of the first observations that we saw here when Abraham's faith was being tested is that he obeyed. And that sort of struck me odd. I don't know about you, but it says in Genesis 22 verse 3, it says, so Abraham rose early in the morning. He didn't delay. He immediately obeyed. We said that Abraham's obedience in Genesis 22, 3 and 4, when he rose up early, was shaped by God's promise to Abraham in Genesis 17. You remember the promise? Genesis 17, God said, I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make you into nations, and kings shall come from you. His obedience to God was shaped by a promise that God had given him. We talked about, are we in that place in our lives when our faith is being tested and things come in? Do we faithfully obey, or do we fearfully rebel? Do we faithfully obey, or do we fearfully rebel? And that's a tension we all face. Like, nobody's exempt from that, right? There's all kinds of illustrations we give of our own lives where we could say, hey, I faithfully obeyed, but on this one I fearfully rebelled. The second observation I want to bring up today, and the second and third, we'll see if we get to the last one. Maybe we'll save that for next week, is that Abraham allowed his faith to drive. And this is what I want to sort of... Abraham allowed his faith to drive. Abraham allowed his faith to be the propelling component to his actions. I don't know about you, but if God were to come to me and say, hey, sacrifice your only son, that would be tough to swallow. That would be tough to follow through. That would be tough to faithfully obey. But remember that faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. Faith in Hebrews 11 is just that. So instead of letting his thoughts run wild, instead of letting the request bring him to ruin, instead of letting the probable drown out the possible, he spoke faith into that testing. If you don't believe me, look in Genesis 22, verse 5. In Genesis 22, verse 5, it says, Then Abraham said to his young men, the young men that came with him on his journey, he said, Stay here with the donkey, and I and the boy will go over there, worship, and come to you again, and come again to you. Do you hear it? Stay here. Me and Isaac are going to go over there. We're going to worship, and then we'll be back. Time out. Did God say that he would that Abraham was not supposed to sacrifice? Like, did God say that hey, Abraham, I'm asking you to do this, but really, wink, wink, I'm going to make it, I'm really not. It's a test, man. It's a test. Here's the cheat sheet. Did God say that? No. Did Abraham have any reason to believe that he would be coming back with his son off the mountain? No, there's nothing in the text that would allude that Abraham was not going to physically, not metaphorically, physically sacrifice Isaac on this altar. But yet, Abraham allows his faith to drive the testing in his life. He speaks this in faith, and I'm not a blab it and grab it or whatever. That's not me. I've been in that camp. Whatever. I'm all about the gospel. I'm all about the Bible. But when I read it, I look at Abraham, and he says, hey, stay here. Me and my son, we're going to go over here. We're going to worship, and then we'll be back. If I'm one of those guys, I'm going, I thought he was going to go sacrifice him. I love this because so many times we are so timid to speak out in faith those things, like Hebrews says, right? Assured of the things hoped for and convicted of the things that he couldn't see. I think why would he say that if he didn't believe it? Here's the rub I want to give to you today is I think so many times when testing comes, instead of letting faith drive our actions or faith drive our emotions or faith drive our obedience, what we do is we step back and we fear. Just because your faith is being tested or you're facing hardship doesn't mean that you have to be silent. This is what I do all the time. I'm notorious for this. My faith is being tested, I go ghost. I go ghost. I don't tell people. I don't confide in brothers that love me. I go ghost. I often don't look at myself in the mirror and speak faith into my struggle. I'm just being honest with you. There are times where that happens. Hardship comes, sickness comes, death comes, pain comes. And instead of speaking life into my situation, I don't speak at all. Someone once said that silence is golden. And silence can also be yellow. Speak hope into those things that are up against you. See, let the assurance of the things hoped for drown out your doubts and fears and anxiety. See, because God is always faithful. We're saying this. All that seems to be the undertone of this whole thing is that God is always faithful. God is always able. God can restore. God can fill in the blank. What is the one thing in your mind right now that seems impossible for God to do in your life? You got it. I know you do. You got the one thing in your mind that you feel like is impossible for God to do. And I double dog dare you to start speaking faith into that. Start speaking faith into that. But wait, I can't see it. That's okay. The Bible says that the things that are seen are temporal, the things that are unseen are eternal. You know what? Sometimes it's good that you don't see it. Because if you see it, guess what? It ain't faith. You remember Matthew or Thomas? Remember Thomas? Doubting Thomas. Doubting Thomas. Right? That's his Facebook handle now. Doubting Thomas, right? He comes in, everybody tells him, we saw Jesus, we saw Jesus. He said, no, I don't believe you, I don't believe you. He says, unless I put my hand into his side. Jesus comes in, he says, here you go. And what did Jesus say? You remember he said? He said, blessed are those who believe and don't see. That takes faith. We said this week too. It's like, that's really hard to do. Is it? Is it? Like, because I get this all the time. Wade, you're telling me to believe in a God I cannot see. Yeah. How do you expect me to do that? And every one of you sat in a chair that you didn't question one bit if it would hold you. Every one of you felt the wind sometime this week and never questioned what it was and never saw it. We believe in things we can't see all the time. All the time. All the time. I'm just saying that's some good evidence or good help to encourage you to believe in God, who is the maker of the wind. Right? We believe in gravity, don't we? Right? Isn't it funny? We believe in things we can't see all the time. Let's stop copping out on this. I just think it's hard to believe in somebody I can't see. How come it's easy for you to believe in things like stuff that you can't see? How come you can walk in faith all the time when you drive your vehicle and when you sit down in chairs, but you can't trust or believe that there's a God in heaven who created you, who made this world? Like, did we really, I don't want to get into this because I'm just going to get rowdy, but like, do you really believe this all just happened for real? When scientists will tell you that if we're talked about this, when we are just 1 degree from being burnt up or 1 degree from being froze up, and that's a word too, you can quote that, froze up. The world shifts 1 degree here, we're dead. It shifts 1 degree out of rotation here, we're dead. Do you understand that it takes a mighty God to hold our fragile existence in balance? Do you think you really got this? Do you really think this just happened? Seriously? Nope. Stop. See, I think the thing that's holding us back from seeing God move in our lives is that we, for some reason, we're allowing fear and anxiety. We're allowing the probable to drown out the possible. We're allowing this idea in our head that it just can't happen like that. You just can't do that. Wade, you need to be careful. You don't want to get people's hopes up. Why? How many of you could use some hope? How many of you know somebody that could use some hope? No, I'm going to get your hopes up because this God is real. He's real, like real, real. I believe he's realer than us. I'm being for real. Because you can't convince me otherwise, man. You can't convince me because, see, my life's been changed. Your life has 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 been changed. See, you can't convince me that God's not here and that God's not real because I can't take his story from him. It don't matter if he knows one verse in the Bible. He could tell you, God changed my life. 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 Maybe what we should be asking is for God to change my life. The third thing, y'all ain't going to let me get to the fourth thing today. The third thing is this. Fourth thing is really cool, so we'll save that. Third thing is this. Abraham, right, he willfully obeys. I want to encourage you, if God is speaking to you and telling you, hey, I want you to do this, I need you to do this, even if you're like, well, I don't know if God's really telling me to stop cheating. Yes, he is. You need to just willfully obey. Willfully obey. The second thing is let your faith drive. The third thing that I see that's just amazing is that Abraham even speaks faith to Isaac. I think this is sketchy. Now remember, Isaac is the one who's going to die. And I got tons of stuff on this because I never see Isaac in this story going, hey, Dad, I don't know if I'm cool with this. Any kids in here, that'd be the first thing you say? Okay, good. There's some of us. Some of y'all don't want to admit it. Real quick, if your parents ever tell you that, you need to ask questions. Abraham puts wood on Isaac. He makes Isaac carry the wood. He's old, but he's making him carry the wood. He gets there. And look at this, Genesis 22, 5-9. Look at this. And Abraham said to this young man, stay here, right? He stayed here. Stay here. The boy and I are going over there to worship, and we'll come to you again. And Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac. I think that's messed up. Hey, man, I'm about to sacrifice you. You want to take this wood? Get all the work out of you I can get. Horrible. He put the wood on Isaac, his son, and he took in his hand the fire and the knife. This is for real. He is for real. So they both went up together, and Isaac finally says this, my father. Abraham, here I am. He says, behold, the fire, I got the wood, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering? I don't think Abraham had a conversation with Isaac before they went up there. You talk about an awkward moment. He's, I got the wood. You got the knife and the fire. Where is the sacrifice? In verse 8, Abraham said, everybody say it, first three words, God will provide. Say that again. God will provide. If you don't hear nothing, you got to hear that today. He looked at him and says, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they went, both of them together. And when they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar, and he laid the wood in order and bound Isaac, his son. Put him on the altar. Put him on top of the wood. I think this is amazing. Abraham seemingly never tells Isaac, you are the sacrifice. He believes in faith that what is asked of him won't be the final thing. That if he will just obey God, no matter how hard it seems or how impossible or how crazy it seems, he is convinced that if he will willfully obey, continue to speak faith and life into this decision, build himself up, the Bible says, in your most holy faith, praying in the Holy Ghost, right? He says, listen, God will provide. And he bounds up his son and he places him on the altar. I think you need to hear this today because Abraham was so convinced that God would provide a sacrifice. Abraham was convicted of what he could not see. What he could not see, God's faithfulness, God's trust, God's power. See, don't fear what you don't know. But wait, it might happen like this. It might not. Be like my wife. My wife would be like, hey, what's the weather going to be like? Oh, it's like 30% chance of rain. You know what she says all the time? Well, it's a 70% chance it won't. I want to conclude with this. Sometimes we don't want to speak faith into our situations, into the very thing that's in front of us because we're fearful, let's be honest, that God won't come through. Tell me I'm a lie. We stay silent because we don't want to speak it out. We don't want to speak out that God, you will provide because we have a fear that he won't. So we think we'll jinx the whole thing, or we'll think we'll be hurt when he doesn't, or if he does. See, that's the thing. We don't even know. We don't even give God a chance. We don't even let him play. Check this out. Luke 18:27. What is impossible with man is possible with God. Matthew 19:26. With man, this is impossible. With God, all things are possible. Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Philippians 4:19. And my God will supply every need of yours according to his riches and glory in Christ Jesus. 1 John 4:4. Right? Come on. He says, little children, you are from God and have overcome them. For he who is in you is greater than he that is in the world. See, I think what the problem sometimes is that we forget what God has said. We forget what he said because we're not reading about him. I said the last 3 weeks, don't outmode this. Build a relationship with Jesus. Some of us right now, you're in places where you're like, you know what, Wade, this whole like God will provide, that's where I'm at. And you are scared to death to speak that out. You really are. You are scared to speak hope into your situation because what you're really fearful of isn't God moving. What you're really fearful of is what if he doesn't? What if we just change that narrative and said, but what if he does? Stand with me.